I'll take this house. I rolled my eyes, not knowing why, when my brother-in-law, Sean, said this. I had just returned from my husband's funeral a few minutes ago, so what in the world was he talking about? I was puzzled, but Sean continued, you need to get out of here. It's not good for you to stay in this house forever. Sean threw me a troublesome look as he said these words. This is the house my husband and I used to live in, so why should I leave? I stood there stunned by Sean's selfish behavior. My name is Kathy, a 37-year-old housewife. I live at home with my husband, John, who is 1 year older than me. I have wanted to be a nurse since I was a student, and after graduating from high school, I went to a university that had a nursing program. After graduating from college, I started working as a nurse at a general hospital. When I was 30 years old, I met him when he came to visit a friend. He was close in age, kind and cheerful, and I gradually became attracted to him. After a while, he confessed his feelings for me and we started dating, and we got married at the age of 32. At John's request, I decided to become a full-time housewife, and for the next 5 years we lived our lives together as husband and wife. Although they had occasional fights, they were able to say what was on their minds to each other, and I think they were a very close couple. I wish these happy times could continue for a long time to come. However, after becoming involved with that man, the life that should have been so enjoyable slowly fell apart. John had a younger brother, Sean, who was a year older than him. Perhaps because of the 10-year age difference, Sean grew up being loved and cared for by his family and relatives, and as a result, he became a very selfish person. His selfish behavior has been bothering his parents-in-law, and about 3 years ago, after a fight with his father-in-law, Sean moved out of the family home. But having run away from his parents' house, but not having any friends or acquaintances he could rely on, Sean turned to his own brother, my husband. John seemed to be unwilling to leave his adorable little brother behind, but I was not so inclined. However, I could not leave Sean with nowhere to go and no way to return to his parents' house, so we decided to let him live in our home. It had been a few days since Sean and I moved in together, but he had been staying in his room for a long time. He only came out of his room when he needed to eat or use the bathroom. Since he did not have a job, he did not bring in any money for living expenses, and Sean acted as if this life was normal. I grew frustrated little by little, and when he came out of his room, I tried to talk to him. It's not good for your health if you stay in your room all the time, so why don't you go outside once in a while? No, it's none of your business. I knew what to expect, but Sean did not listen to me. But we can't live like this forever, can we? We can't afford to live like this forever either. I tried to tell him that, but he didn't seem to like what I said. Sean glared at me. Shut up. You don't get to tell me what to do. He yelled at me. Sean's face was so frightening to me that I couldn't speak anymore. Apparently, John also thought that the current situation was not good for Sean. I'm sorry, I've put Kathy through a lot of trouble. I'll talk to him tomorrow about what we're going to do. John was as kind as ever. Sean might be willing to listen to his brother's words. Despite these faint hopes, John and Sean never had a chance to talk to each other. The next day, I saw John off as usual, but around noon I received a phone call. Are you a member of John's family? Actually. I stood there for a while listening to the conversation. I was told that John had been in a traffic accident and had been taken to the hospital. I was told that he was in a critical condition, unconscious, and I rushed to the hospital where he had been taken. My memory of that time is vague, and to be honest, I do not remember much. While I was on my way to the hospital, I couldn't stop thinking about the memories from the time I met John until now, and John's smile this morning. But by the time we arrived at the hospital, John had already passed away. My in-laws had also rushed to the hospital, and although they must have been in shock to be told of their son's death, they were there for me the whole time. After hearing more details from the hospital doctors and the police, I discussed the funeral with my parents-in-law, and when I returned home, it was already nighttime. What the hell were you doing up until this time? I'm hungry. Perhaps because he had moved out of his parents' house, Sean did not seem to have been informed of his brother's death by anyone. If you're a stay-at-home mom, you should at least do your job. I decided to tell him about today's events, though I was still disgusted by Sean's usual snide remarks. John passed away. In a car accident. He looked surprised for a moment at my words. My brother died? He did not look sad at all. That's all. You're not sad that your brother died? No, I'm not. He was quite a nag. I feel like I can finally live freely now that my brother is gone. I couldn't believe my ears when Sean laughed. It is true that John sometimes warned Sean about his attitude toward life, but he said this because he was thinking about his brother as a family member. Having seen the kind and gentle John, who was always thinking of his younger brother, close at hand, I could not forgive Sean's comment. You were in trouble because you ran away from your parents' house, so John said it was okay for you to live in this house. You didn't have to say anything like that. But Sean sighed tediously and turned his back on me. I'm not going to the funeral. My mom and dad will be there anyway, and it'll be too much trouble. With that, Sean retreated back into his room. How could he be so unconcerned about his brother's death as if nothing had happened? I was saddened by Sean's words and actions, and at the same time, a question popped into my head. What is Sean going to do now? After John's death, he can no longer continue to live in this house. However, I did not think that Sean would leave so easily because of his personality. After thinking it over, I decided to take a certain action. On the day of John's funeral, Sean did not show his face even once. Although he had said he would not go, I felt a mixture of sadness, frustration, and a variety of other emotions when I realized that he really had no intention of coming. But that night, something unexpected happened. When I returned home after John's funeral, I noticed that my stuff was gone, as it should have been in the living room. Wah! As I stood there, Sean said something I couldn't believe. I threw your stuff away. What are you talking about? Sean told me that while I was at John's funeral, he had dumped my stuff at the local dump. I've been trying to get out of your way for a while, but now that my brother is dead, it's a good time for you to get out. I'll take this house. Sean's selfish request gave me a headache. This house is mine and John's. You're the one who should leave, no matter what you think. I controlled my anger and said to Sean. I told you that I was going to take this house because my brother is dead. Since you are a stranger anyway, why don't you rent a house somewhere else or go back to your parents' house, whatever you want? Sean smiled a sickening, mocking smile. I can't believe it. Your own brother died, and not only did you not show up for the funeral, but you're planning to kick me out and continue living in this house. Perhaps thinking I was in a state of shock, Sean continued. You should be thanking you for helping me get rid of your stuff. Well, it will be picked up with the rest of the trash tomorrow, so I think you should go get it before then. Laughing, I decided to tell him the truth. All right. I'm going to leave, just like you wanted me to. As if he had been waiting for me to say that, Sean smiled a triumphant smile. I'm glad you agree. Then pack your bags quickly and leave tomorrow. No, I'm leaving right now. I don't want to be in the same space with you any longer. Sean tilted his head curiously, as if the word right now was unexpected. I've been keeping my door locked since you moved in with me, just in case, so I guess you didn't know what was going on in my room. I opened my own room and looked very surprised. In fact, I had moved most of my belongings to my parents' house so that Sean would not notice. However, it was unexpected that the last of my belongings that I had set aside to carry were thrown away during John's funeral. I continued to Sean, who looked surprised. Also, you can't live in this house anymore, so you need to leave as soon as possible. What are you talking about that you don't understand? I ignored Sean's words and began to sort through my belongings that I had left at home. He was not pleased with my attitude and yelled at me, Hey, what do you mean? What do you mean? I sighed loudly and turned to Sean. I think you've been misunderstanding me this whole time. This house used to be mine. What? Sean looked at me and froze, as if he hadn't expected it. I haven't told you this for a long time, but I lived in this house before I married John. Yes, we actually bought this house when I was working as a nurse. At the time, I was not interested in love or marriage at all, and I thought I would probably live the rest of my life alone. I had a good income, and since I was living at home, I had a considerable amount of money saved up. When I was in my late 20s, I knew I couldn't live in my parents' house forever, and I fell in love with the building and decided to buy it. I lived alone for a while, and it was a year later that I met John. Since I had just bought the house, I decided to have John live in the house as well. I had told my parents-in-law, but as expected, Sean was unaware of this fact. Sean's face, which had been so cheerful earlier, turned pale as if he had finally understood the situation. The house is in my name to begin with, so it won't belong to you anyway. But if you really don't want me to stay, I'll leave. What? Because I've decided to sell this house. I'm busy getting ready to move out, so you'd better get your stuff together as soon as possible. I'm not going to do that on my own. I don't have anywhere else to go, unlike you. Sean protested, looking quite agitated. I don't know what you're talking about. You've been acting selfishly all this time. Why don't you either find a job quickly or apologize to your father and mother and ask them to let you live at home? I said coldly to Sean, who was indeed in a hurry. I told you to wait. I apologize for everything I've done, just please reconsider selling it. At least until I find a job. Sean begged desperately, but my feelings were not swayed in the slightest. You know how many times both John and I have told you? How are you going to make a living from this? When are you going to find a job? But you were the one who ignored them and did nothing, weren't you? You deserve what you get. Sean looked down silently, as if he had nothing to say in reply. I'm not your guardian, and I can't take care of you anymore. I tell him, and Sean looks dejected. I turn my back on Sean and leave the room without once looking back. I headed for the dumpster near my house and found that Sean was right, my belongings had been bagged and dumped. I patted myself on the chest, feeling very glad that I had moved my belongings to my parents' house before Sean did. I retrieved my belongings from the dumpster and headed for my parents' house on foot. When I arrived at my parents' house, both my father and mother came out to the front door worried. They were quite surprised that I would come back to my parents' house on the day of the funeral after John's sudden death in a car accident, but when I explained the situation, they gladly agreed to let me stay at their house. I had no time at all to grieve John's death because of Sean's case, but as I spent more time alone at my parents' house, I remembered John and spent some time crying for a while. The death of someone close to me was a great shock, and although I was sad that I had to sell the house where I spent time with John as a result, even if it was to ask Sean to leave, I managed to recover from it with the support of my father and mother. Since then, Sean ended up going back to his parents' house, and I heard that he was stiffed by his in-laws. In fact, at John's funeral, I had told my in-laws that Sean was living at our house and that I had told them all about his usual behavior and what he said and did. They seemed very surprised, but repeatedly bowed down to me and said they were sorry for the trouble they had caused. The other day, my parents-in-law came to our house with Sean to apologize. They said, "We are so sorry for all the trouble my son has caused." I know it's not enough to apologize, but I couldn't stand still. Kathy, I am so sorry. I know it's not something I can apologize for, but I just couldn't help myself. I'm sorry. Sean's expression was as grumpy as before, but he apologized in a weak voice, as if this incident had been quite hard to bear. Frankly, I still felt more that I could not forgive him, but I decided to forgive Sean, thinking that John might be saddened if I kept on wrangling with him over such a matter. After that, Sean apparently looked for a job while living at home, but he still had a hard time dealing with his family, and they were constantly fighting every day. Soon after that, he started working part-time at a supermarket, but after about 3 months of working, he left home again and started living on his own. However, since he left home with no money to spare, he is living on the edge. I decided that I couldn't depend on my parents' house forever, so I started working as a nurse again. Although I had a few years of blanks, I quickly got used to the job. When I lived at home, I had to worry about Sean every day, and it was all very stressful, but now my life is very fulfilling and I am able to spend every day freely. I'm off to work, honey. I said to John's picture and headed off to work. Thank you for watching. How did you like today's story? please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next story.